Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Garden Hour. I'm Jennifer Schutter. I'm a field specialist in horticulture. And today's Garden Hour, we have several horticulture specialists with us from around the state. If you look at this map, you can find your region and the county you reside in, and you can see the horticulture specialist that covers your county. If you have questions, you can reach out to them. Today, Gwen Funk from the Northwest region will be doing the chat, and Peng Tian will be doing Ask Questions here. So if you have a question you'd like to ask during the garden hour, please ask it, and we will get it answered. The garden hour is being live streamed, and you can watch that on YouTube if you'd like to go back and watch it, or if you missed parts of it, you can go back and watch it. And also snippets will be made, and you can watch a snippet later on this YouTube channel. And with that, we will go ahead and get started. And Zack will start us off with a weather report.
Thank you, Jennifer, and good afternoon, everyone. A lot of us across the state today started out and woke up to a very wet morning, or you were woken up overnight by some rumbling of thunderstorms because overall it was a pretty wet night across a lot of Missouri. And so I want to start and show our 24-hour precipitation across the state of Missouri. And this was through about 7 a.m. this morning here. And so these are going to be the overnight totals that probably don't capture some of the ongoing rain to the south and east. But really here the focus is basically along and north of the Missouri River, some really impressive rainfall totals from yesterday. And so anywhere you see these red dots on the map, that's greater than 2 inches of rain in the last 24 hours. But also we see some of these maroon dots, and we have some 4 and 5 inch totals really centered around Boone County and Columbia here. And so I'm located in Columbia here and on campus, and you can see this station here that had 4.68 inches of rainfall is located on the University of Missouri's main campus at Sanborn Field. And this was our wettest 24-hour precipitation observation going back all the way to 2021. And so it's really been a while since the Columbia Metro has seen a rainfall event like this. And what I found interesting is even zooming in, those 4 inch totals were pretty widespread across the Columbia area and Boone County as well. So quite a bit of rain this morning. The first look was just looking at some of the stations that were recording rainfall across the state. I also wanted to show these are the radar estimated totals that help to kind of fill in the gaps where we don't have rain gauges everywhere. But you can see the radar also picks up on this area here along I-70 and the Missouri River, but also a pretty large area up to the north with greater than 2 inches of rainfall. So very large totals from yesterday. And before overnight, we kind of switched into this more of a heavy rain event with flash flood warnings and what we would call training of thunderstorms, where they're very slow moving and moving across the same area. But a lot of these storms started out in northwest Missouri, still slow movers, but they were more of a severe weather threat than a flooding threat. And so here we see some of the wind reports that came along with some of those severe storms yesterday, mainly concentrated in that northwest portion of the state there. And currently, if you're a little bit farther south, rain is still working its way to the south and east here. Definitely a little bit weaker than it was as it was closer to the overnight hours, but still just looking at really kind of draped across I-44 across Missouri now. But if you look to the west and Kansas, there's some more green and blue on the radar. That's rainfall that is going to slowly move east and into the state. So could be some more rain here on the way during the afternoon. But besides our rain last night, we can kind of finally put June in the rearview mirror after last week, and we've closed the book here. And so climatologically, we can finalize our numbers for a lot of the major sites. We don't have our statewide numbers yet, but it looks like June's going to be about 2 degrees above normal for Missouri, and it will go down also as a wet month as well. And so not everyone in the state was wet. There's places like St. Louis, Northeast Missouri, and far Southwest Missouri that were a little bit drier than normal, but the vast majority of us saw more rainfall than we typically expect in June. And in fact, if you look at this map here that shows that June rainfall, anywhere you see blue on the map is greater than 5 inches of rainfall, which is above our normal for the month of June. So a wet June to end what was a wet and warm spring as well. And so currently, where's all this kind of rainfall left us here in the long term, and kind of looking at our hazards? And we really have quite a few still active flood warnings across the state as of right now. So this map is updated to about 30 minutes ago, and we see some of these aerial flood warnings for large areas where we saw the rainfall going up to Kirksville, but also our Missouri River and Mississippi River here. You see the green along those rivers, and we're continually to see that these rivers are running higher than normal, and we have seen some minor to even moderate flooding along portions of the Missouri and Mississippi rivers. And not all of this water along those rivers is coming from in the state, also seeing some excess rainfall to our north and west as well. Additionally, we have some heat to the south here, where you see anywhere where you see these orange and kind of pink colors, we have heat advisories and excessive heat warnings that are also in effect. This morning, if we also look on the right, we had an early release of the week's U.S. drought monitor because of the holiday tomorrow. But you can see really only 2 areas of concern, one to the northeast in Missouri. This doesn't incorporate the rainfall we saw last night, so looks like there might be some improvements there where 2 or 3 inches fell in some of those moderate drought areas. And then we're really starting to watch southwest Missouri, kind of along that Arkansas-Oklahoma border, getting a little bit drier down there with the heat this time of year. And so looking ahead over the next few days, unfortunately, we are going to have more of this rainfall. Kind of showed the radar already, but we can also see this kind of band of clouds on our satellite here. And what your weather looks like in Missouri really depends on where you're at in the state. And that's because this band of clouds is really kind of a stationary front. And we've got some cooler air to the north, very warm, moist air to the south. But this kind of boundary is not going to move much over the next 2 days. And so a few kind of waves of rainfall we can see here on our rainfall forecast maps for Wednesday and Thursday. I'd say maybe a little bit more focused towards south of I-70, but definitely a chance of rainfall over the next 2 days for most of the state here. And just like we saw late yesterday into overnight, there is a slight risk for flash flooding or excessive rainfall today as well. And so this is really generally anywhere south of I-70 today. Hard to predict where that flash flooding might occur, but similar to yesterday, we've got a lot of slow-moving storms with a lot of water in them as well that can produce those higher rainfall totals. And finally, looking over the next 2 days, with this rainfall, there is a severe threat as well. And so we see our convective outlooks from the Storm Prediction Center highlighting really southern Missouri today and a slight risk for severe weather where you're south of that boundary, and a little bit more of Missouri in that slight risk tomorrow. But overall, it looks like the main risk with any storms that do become severe is damaging winds, not much of a hail or tornado threat at this point. But once we get past these couple days of rain here, what we will see are some changing temperatures. And so I'll show the highs today, and we see pretty seasonal highs for most of the state with high temperatures in the 80s. But look at south of that kind of boundary and those clouds southeast of I-44. Our highs here are in the lower to mid 90s, and a lot of moisture and high humidity down in that area right now as well. And so if we look at the heat index that combines that heat with temperatures and humidity, getting up to 110 degrees in the Boot Heel, for example. And so that's why we have these heat advisories and heat warnings across extreme southern Missouri and this is expected to continue tomorrow, where 90s to the south, high heat indices, but a little bit cooler to the north. And so probably expect those heat advisories and excessive heat warnings to continue into tomorrow as well. But the good news will be this isn't prolonged heat if you're in southern Missouri, because check out the highs by Friday. We're going to be down to the 80s statewide with even some 70s in northern Missouri. And that's because this pesky boundary of showers and storms is finally going to start pushing off to our southeast and leave some cooler air behind it. And so expect cooler temperatures into the weekend and really early next week, much closer to our seasonal normals for this time of year. And then we'll start to look for that next chance of rain really Sunday into Monday as we look at our precip forecast here. Right now, looking more like a Western Missouri rainfall event and really looking at maybe around a ½ inch for some of those locations. And so this will be kind of our next rainmaker once we get into the weekend and go into early next week. But then looking ahead, not much of a clear forecast here. Honestly, these Climate Prediction Center outlooks that we've been looking at to kind of look at that week 2 period have really through all of June been highlighting increased probability for above average temperatures. And it's good to see them really back off that forecast here, still leaning above normal for that forecast, but not nearly with the same confidence we were seeing. And so maybe indicating that as we get in that second week of July, closer to seasonal temperatures. And similarly, not much of a strong forecast for that precipitation. So we'll really have to kind of see as we get closer to next week what we can expect there. But otherwise, that's all I've got for today, and hope everybody enjoys the 4th of July.
Thank you, Zach. We did have a question that came in, and the question is in regards to planting trees this time of the year. Is that a good thing or should it not be done? And Todd Higgins, our horticulture specialist from the Northwest region, is going to answer that question.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's a great question. I've been planting some trees around my yard and trying to determine, hey, is it too late for me to do that? I still have some more trees to plant, so it was fun to investigate this for my own purposes as well as to answer this question. So, can you plant trees in the summer? Well, the short answer is yes, you can. Plant now if you can, actually. A couple things to think about before you make that decision is, can you supply enough water if you plant now? Can you water frequently if you place it in its intended permanent spot? And the reason we ask that is because obviously it's going to be a warm summer, as we just heard, and we need to be able to apply moisture or water to our new plantings on a regular basis. If you can apply water now, planting now should be successful. But if you cannot, if you're planting them too far away from your water source, then waiting until fall might be the best option. So what are some of the considerations if you are going to plant now? Well, first off, make sure that you dig a large enough hole before you put the tree in the ground. And this is because we need to loosen up that soil to make it to where water can get in, air can get in, and the roots can expand to get that water, get those nutrients, and then really establish that tree. So we like to recommend that 2 to 3 times larger than the diameter of the container should be how large you dig that hole. And you can see on this diagram, the hole is actually a lot larger than the root ball down there from a container, but it gives you an idea of what you need to be able to excavate to successfully plant a tree. couple other things to think about. Some of us think, well, maybe if I get some garden soil, it'd be better for my tree than what I have in place. Depends on what you have for soil, but don't over amend that soil. Don't use potting soil because then the roots are going to get used to that kind of soil as they expand, and they may not expand beyond that. So use the natural soil to the best of your ability. Some amendments may be necessary. Some addition may be necessary. Some places you may have a lot of rocks in your soil, and you may want to remove those as you dig your hole. And you're going to need to replace that volume that the rocks took up with something. So a good garden soil can be mixed in to meet that need. If you find that your pots, your trees are pot bound in terms of the roots, you need to prune those off. Otherwise, you risk the problem of the plant roots just moving in circles and essentially binding up the root and the stem of the tree, and then that can kill the tree. So we don't want to do that. We want to take time to try to break that root ball apart, which may include some root pruning, and we recommend safely using some tools to do that, and then watering it well. Now, the next one is not all rain's the same. We've had a lot of rain, 4 inches in Columbia overnight. Was that a good rain for planting, for crops, for landscape plants? Well, maybe not, because soaking rains are a lot better than downpours. Downpours tend to run off. So when you dig your hole, if you're going to plant in the summer, if you dig it this weekend, for instance, look to see where the moisture line is in your soil. Is it all the way down to the bottom of the area where you're going to plant your tree when you dig the hole? Or does it stop maybe 2 inches down and then it sort of dries out after that? That should give you an indication of the kind of inflow of water that we've had recently. So pay attention to that as you dig your holes. Then again, so that kind of goes into the next statement: water regularly, even if the rains have recently occurred. Because if they've been hard rains, like some of us have had, not much infiltration of water has occurred. And then irrigate well. One good soaking is better than many sprinklings. So go ahead and water that tree well, even if it's just once a week that you water it, but water it well so that the water soaks into the soil and penetrates down to where the roots are. If you're going to wait and plant until fall, keep your containers well watered over the summer. Once again, prune pot-bound roots before planting, and consider fertilizing those trees in containers as needed, but do not do so excessively. So most potting soil mixtures have some types of slow release fertilizers in them, and really should not require fertilization prior to planting. However, with a lot of rain or irrigation, you may start to see some nutrient deficiencies occurring in the leaves, and you may want to apply some kind of a soluble fertilizer that you can apply as you irrigate to help those trees come back to where they need to be, improve that nutrition of the soil. There is a guide here, that MU Extension guide on planting landscape trees, that is helpful. It has a lot of good information in it. And that's all I have, subject to your questions.
All right. Thank you, Todd. And now Debbie's going to talk about making soapy water for controlling insects. A lot of gardeners want to use soapy water. They ask, does it really work? And so Debbie's going to tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm going to do that. I want to share my screen first. soon as I can figure out, sorry guys. You'd think after all these years we would be pros at this, right? And then I want to make sure that I put it in reading view. All righty. So what I'm talking about today is looking at is soap really, are you able to use it as an insecticide? And essentially the answer is yes, you can, but, and so we'll talk about some of this. And what I selected a few pictures here, which I thought was really interesting. All of these are aphids, and you'll notice that they're different colors. There's gobs of colors of aphids that are all over the place. Just so that you're aware, some of them are really pretty, like these bluish purpley ones that are down at the bottom. I think those are really cool there. So let's look at this here. So we're looking at insecticidal soap, or actually using soap of some sort of dish soap. So how does it work? Does it really work? So what they believe is that it actually affects the outer coating of soft-bodied insects. So what happens is just like you and I, if we're continuously using soap all over, our skin can dry out. So we use some different lotions on our skin to protect it, keep it moist, and more or less that's the same effect as what's happening on the insects, but predominantly with the soft-shelled insects. And some of the beetles that you'll see, actually you have some here, hopefully those are Japanese beetles that are in that picture in some soapy water. They're not going to necessarily dry those insects out, but what you can do is make that bucket of soapy water. And what happens is that dish soap actually breaks the surface of the water. And technically, those insects will eventually go ahead and fall to the bottom or start floating within the water that you're throwing those insects in, if it doesn't bother you to pick up those insects and throw them in that water. Using soap can be safe for pollinators and for our natural enemies. So remember, when we use insecticides, they're not selective like some of our herbicides are. The insecticides are going to kill or they're not going to kill. And they'll kill everything. So they'll kill the good as well as the bad. So that's why some folks are out there wanting to use sprays of soapy water, hoping that that will work. Sometimes just picking them off is good enough as well, putting them in that bucket of water. So we need to look at the right insect and the right application. So not all insects are going to be affected by the soapy water. So it's soapy water being used as a spray is not a universal insecticide. And again, it's very good at the small, soft-bodied insects. So for example, aphids, whiteflies, thrips, and mites are really good for soapy sprays. The larger soft-bodied insects like caterpillars and beetles, the larvae of a lot of the different beetles are moths and butterflies. The caterpillar, the larva, is not truly affected by soapy water. So think about what insects you're really trying to use the soapy water on and make sure that you're using it for the right insect. We want to make sure that we use the spray correctly. Soapy water actually needs to coat the entire insect because it's going to dry that insect out. If you see new insects all of a sudden coming, you're going to have to continue to spray. Make sure you take and look at the leaves and turn them over and look at the underside of those leaves. And if you see insects, make sure you give it a generous spray so that the insects will be totally covered. Don't spray if you don't see the insects, because the soap is actually affecting the insect by drying it out. And if you use the soap and you're using the wrong amount of soap mixed in with the water, you can actually burn the leaves. So you need to be careful with that. Then the other things to think about, so we talk about the potential of burning if there's too much soap. So let's look at what is a good formulation. So again, too much of soap to water can burn those leaves. So we want to use a 2% soap solution. And what that really means is taking 2 teaspoons to 1 pint of water. You want to make sure that it's mixed up really, really well. And also, as we note with using regular insecticides, if the temperature is really high and there's a lot of humidity, sometimes those insecticides aren't going to necessarily work. The herbicides are very similar to that as well. So it's not as effective when the temperatures are really high. So take that into consideration. So as Zack showed on the map, if those temperatures are high and you have high humidity, that's not a good time to be able to use the soapy water formulation. There are some plants that can be sensitive more so to the soaps than other plants. So most of those are hawthorn, sweet pea, cherries, and plum. So what you might want to do is do a test area first on a plant to see if it has any kind of negative effect on that particular plant and that variety. There have been some reports of different tomato varieties having some sort of an effect, a negative effect because of the soapy water. But that's just anecdotal, but I wanted to at least bring that up just to verify that if you're not certain, make sure you just test it. Don't just automatically go out and spray all of your plants. Just spray perhaps one of them to see if it actually is going to be a negative effect on the plant growth in some capacity. And that's all I have for right now. Come back next week and I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about soapy water and insecticidal soaps in particular. And then again, not all soaps are going to be the same. So see you next week for that continuation.
All right. Thank you, Debbie. Good information, because a lot of our gardeners do have questions about whether they should be using it and if it's going to burn their plants. So thanks for telling us about it. Our next topic is vermiculture, and Gwen is going to talk to us about that.
Hello, everyone. I hope you are doing well. Yes, I'm going to talk a little bit about a different kind of composting that uses worms. So we're using the worms to create that black gold compost that is so helpful in our gardens. And again, I have to find there we go. There we go. So you probably know about the whole idea of composting. We're just kind of speeding up a natural ecosystem service that Mother Nature provides for us, where we have the organic materials coming into the pile, and then the microorganisms do their respiration and break things down, and we end up getting our compost. So the benefits of compost: it disposes of our waste, it adds organic matter back to the soil, and it improves the soil quality, so that the plants can absorb water and absorb nutrients a little bit better. It works well as a mulch, but it's more of a soil amendment than a fertilizer. And we need to worry about the carbon-nitrogen ratio, our greens to our browns. If we don't quite get that ratio right, the compost pile may not work as well. And with the traditional compost, backyard compost pile, it usually kind of takes up a little bit of space. And here are just some pictures of things that you might see from diagrams on how to build a compost pile. But in some urban settings, we don't have that space. So we may turn to vermicomposting. And this is a type of composting that uses a species of earthworms and other microbes to decompose the food waste. And it's less space, usually less materials, and it can be done indoors, and it can reduce about 2/3 of your food waste that you have. It can also be used for your yard waste as well, depending on how big your container is. Generally speaking, these are a type of earthworm from Annelida, yeah, I said that right. And then the class Climatologist. These are segmented worms that have a true body cavity. So they also have a crop that helps grind up those soil particles, and the materials that they're eating. So it's important maybe to add a little bit of grit to your compost, but not any worm will do. These are the types of earthworms that live near or at the surface. They do not burrow into the ground. So they're called epigeic earthworms, and there's about 9,000 species of these worms, but only 7 species work for our compost bin for vermiculture. And the most common is the red wiggler, the Eosinea fetida. And there are a couple of others that will work, but this is the most common. Now, watch out for the common name red wiggler, because red wiggler is also it's a common name, so it's applied to a lot of different kinds of worms, just like thistle is applied to a lot of different kinds of plants. So it is important to know that scientific name. The habitat that you want to provide for the worms, you want it to be dark and moist, have good ventilation. The temperature, you can see 55 to 77 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's kind of analogous to what our normal houses and garages are. So they don't have to have any extreme heat or coolness. You do not want to collect from nature. Try to buy from a reputable supplier or from someone who already has this kind of compost going on. You may end up with the wrong kind of worm. For example, our night crawlers actually digs a little bit deeper in the soil, and they only come out when it rains or at night. Those are not the kinds of worms that we want. So they actually have another classification. So make sure that you're getting the right kind of worms. And then you also need to think about your ratio of food waste. How much food waste do you generate in a week? And it should be about 2 pounds of food waste to about 1 pound of worms. So that should give you an idea of how many worms you need to purchase if you get that, or how big your system needs to be. These earthworms have a very short life cycle, but they also have a high fecundity rate. So they will reproduce and double their population in a very short time. You'll probably hardly ever see a dead worm in your bin, though, because they are mostly water. So as they die, that water gets absorbed in the other material, and then you don't really see the casing anymore. When you set up your habitat, again, determine the size that you need. If you have about 1 pound of refuse per week, then you need about 1 square foot of surface area in the bin. And shallow is better than deep, because if it's deep, that adds weight, and that will kind of compress your compost and cut down on the airflow, and then that can be a problem for your bin. Keep it in a convenient place. You can keep these under your cabinet, or under your sink in a cabinet, under a desk or a table somewhere that's out of the way in a corner. You can keep it out in your garage. Just wherever it's convenient for you to add your table scraps. Provide the bedding, and the bedding can be shredded paper, cardboard, it can be leaves or straw, but you want to make sure that it's wet. Not soaking wet, but you want to soak your materials for about 24 hours and then wring it out. So like it's a wet, so you squeeze your material, it feels damp, but you don't have water that's coming out of it. And then make it fluffy. The amount of moisture is one of the most common problems with vermiculture. So you do want to get this moisture right. And then kind of allow the bedding to kind of settle a little bit before you add the worms. When you are getting your bin going, you want to bury the food waste throughout the bin in different locations as you add stuff to it. And then about every 3 to 6 months, depending on how quickly it works, you'll just kind of move the compost to one side. You'll quit feeding it. And then when you add the new straw or your new bedding and add in your new waste, migrate out of it into the new bedding. And then you can harvest the compost from the other side. Just like in a regular compost, we don't want to add dairy or meat, and you also would want to avoid highly acidic or alkaline foods, like oranges, grapefruits. I think you can use the rinds of those okay, but the actual pulp probably is not such a good thing, because again, they're a living creature and fluctuations in pH can cause a problem. But potato peelings, cantaloupes, watermelon rinds, eggshells, your flower bouquet that you may have gotten from the market, all of those can also be added to your bin to be recycled and used for compost. The benefits: you get better soil health, increased food and flower production. They're doing some research at Cornell University, and they're seeing some improvements there. Reduced fertilizer costs. And then the picture here shows a resistance to damping off. And you can see the picture here on the left is with the vermicompost. This is without. So adding that biodiversity and microbes to your potting mix, using that vermicompost kind of helps with the resistance of that fungus. It also increases the water retention. And you can use this as an amendment that you add directly into the soil, or you can soak the castings in water and then use that for a drench or as a spray if you would like. You can also sell your things to bait shops or hatcheries. You can also sell the compost. So there are places where you can sell that your product if you need to or if you want to. Common mistakes would be your soil moisture, overfeeding, and then just the ventilation. So those are just things you need to kind of watch out for. And those are citations. And then if you have any questions, you can let me know. But otherwise, thank you. That's all I have.
All right. Thank you, Gwen. And next, Justin Key will talk about wireworms and root crops.
And Jennifer, before we go on, there was a question for Gwen. It says, can you add coffee and tea grounds?
Yes, you can. Those work well. The filter too, if it's paper.
I also received
It's best if you, let's say you can just make sure it's kind of chopped up. The smaller it is, the better it will be.
I also received a question for Todd regarding the watering. So her question is, I have noticed the clay soil around newly planted shrubs. Basically, she planted in the middle of May. It's the shrubs and the trees, they're often damp to wet, but the root ball is dry. Should the root ball be watered in this case? If so, how frequently? This planting area is on the slope, including arborvitae, hydrangeas on standard, paler rose and a Sharon and one Tokyo Tower fringe tree. Thanks. So I guess this question would focus on how to water a root ball if the tree is still damp.
Yeah, the bottom line, I think, is that the root ball is where most of the roots are. Even once you plant them, if the clay soil appears to be damp, clays, because of their structure, can hold more tightly onto water as well as nutrients. But because in water, so they're going to look damp, but that water may not be. So if your root ball is dry, then you should water it. And in terms of the frequency, you really kind of need to look at that root ball and use that as your guide. And go ahead and take your finger or something and poke it down a little ways so you can kind of feel or see how deep the water is, because the surface can dry off pretty quickly. But if it's still moist, say down a half an inch, then you're probably okay and don't need to water right then. So once you start to see that root ball dry, check it out, see how damp the soil is within that root ball, and water is necessary, and give it a good soaking.
All right. So I got a call from a grower up in Pike County that had some issues, and they sent me some pictures, and we determined that it was wireworms, which might not be something that you see all the time in the garden, but if you've harvested potatoes or sweet potatoes and noticed these characteristic holes, you might have had this issue and not been aware of what's going on. So I thought I'd talk about this because it's an interesting insect. So this insect is in the order Coleoptera and the family Elatardae, and it's there's a number of different genus and species of the click beetle or the wireworm that affects the crop. So The one that causes the damage to root crops is the larvae, and the adult is known as the click beetle. So this is a pretty interesting insect, and you might have come across these as well and not really known what they are, but they do make this characteristic popping sound, sometimes when they're startled, but when they get flipped over on their back. So they can propel themselves very, very far, but they're not jumping with their legs like a grasshopper might be. Excuse me. They have a very interesting body parts between their head and thorax. They're able to basically bend their head to flex part of their thorax, and when they let that go, it pops, like a spring action, and they don't always land on their feet. There's some interesting videos out there, slow motion videos, but it's a pretty interesting insect, and they're actually studying the mechanism that this insect is able to flip like that to create autonomous robots that can right themselves. But that's the adult. The larval stage is the problem. So this is most common in new gardens that used to be sod or pasture, or hay fields, and maybe in places where there was a lot of grain crops grown in succession. Also, if grasses tend to proliferate in your garden, grassy weeds, and you're not able to control them, you could see populations sustain in those types of situations. But if you're converting an area of sod or hay field or pasture into a garden, your highest populations of these insects are going to be in the first and second years. And some folks, larger growers, will not follow, for instance, potatoes after sweet corn, which is another grass. And so the reason why there's high populations after grass is because this adult lays its eggs at the base of grasses. So that's why there can be a proliferation of the larvae in areas that have had a lot of grass. So that adult will lay its egg at the base of the grass after mating, and then that larvae will hatch, and it takes a long time for it to become an adult. It can take 3 to 5 years and multiple molting process for the adult to emerge. And so throughout that life cycle, in the larval stage, there can be feeding on root crops. So these are the crops that are affected. So pretty much any of the root crops can suffer damage. And you can cut out these sections and consume these crops. It's not going to hurt you or anything like that. But the storage potential of things like sweet potatoes and potatoes can be severely, severely damaged, because all these wounds are places for post-harvest decaying organisms to enter. So you'll probably notice them on your root crops more than anything else, but they can go after germinating seeds of beans, peas, sweet corn, and cucurbits. So we like to look in terms of integrated pest management at a couple different things. Cultural controls would be avoiding planting root crops for those couple of years after it's been converted from sod or pasture, and to really try to keep up on grassy weed control in the garden. There are no chemical controls labeled for this insect for use by homeowners, but there is some really interesting work done as it relates to the use of entomopathogenic nematodes. And biological control of pests, insects, and diseases is something that I've always been fascinated with. So I just thought I'd kind of talk for a minute about that. So entomopathogenic nematodes are ones that kill insects. And so you can see this is actually a slug, not an insect, but these little nematodes are emerging from the carcass of this slug. So these are tiny soil-dwelling roundworms. You might have heard of some of the pathogenic nematodes that go after plants. So there's a lot of root-feeding nematodes that can cause problems. in agronomic crops and some of our vegetable crops. But entomopathogenic means that they're parasites of insects or they kill insects. So these little tiny nematodes, and some of them are much smaller than what's in that picture there, but they enter the orifices of insects and they live in tandem with a bacteria. So when that nematode enters the body of an insect, like the larval stage of a wireworm, that bacteria reproduces rapidly, and some of the byproducts of those bacteria will kill the insect. And so the nematodes then feed on this bacterial mass and the liquefied host and will emerge to complete their life cycle. These are commercially produced. There's a number of different genus and species of nematodes that are produced, and they are utilized more so in organic agriculture. I got interested in these when I had an issue. I had a small vegetable farm in St. Louis County, and I had issues with what I found out to be Japanese pavement ants, which were an invasive species thought to be brought in somewhere around Lambert Airport and then kind of spread throughout North St. Louis County. But they would actually eat the vegetable transplants from the tender roots down to the main stem, and the plants would die. So I kind of looked into this and bought some entomopathogenic nematodes. You have to apply them with water in the evening or after dark preceding a rain. So they're kind of complicated to apply in that sense, but at least in my case, they were extremely effective in killing that ant population. I don't know. They probably ended up killing other insects, which I didn't kind of think through that whole ecological part of it, but they killed those Japanese pavement ants. I never had any issues with that ant population again. So that is all I have.
Thank you, Justin. We all know that invasive species are very dangerous for native plants. And today, Peng Tian is going to talk about a relatively new disease for beech trees in the United States.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Peng Tian. I'm the director of MU Plant Diagnostic Clinic. Today, I'm going to talk about a new disease called a beech leaf disease. Your first reaction would be, come on, Peng, no more new disease. We don't want any more diseases. I hope you will not be deceived by my title, like meet the new threats. There will be a new foe, new enemy for the plants. Actually, I would like to give you a take-home message in the first slides to let you know the most important points I want to make for this talk. So my take-home message for this talk would be, don't panic, okay? Don't feel nervous or scary, or don't panic, because we don't have many beech trees in Missouri. That's the first point. Second, this disease has not been introduced to Missouri, and it may not cause any plant problems in a while. Third, the beech leaf disease is very host specific. Therefore, this disease will not be transmitted or infect other trees. Why I'm saying that, in your mind, you may kind of like scanning your brain or going through your mind, like, did I ever see beech trees in Missouri? I think I found some beech trees here. I actually had similar reaction. So yesterday when I walked back to the parking lot, I saw a tree, and when I look at the leaf shape, I think that's a beech tree. But after doing research, I found it's called American hornbeam, which is very common landscape tree, relative much shorter than the native beech tree. It has common name with blue beech, which actually have no relationship with the family of beech tree. And the primary reason I'm giving this talk is for your own knowledge, to learn a new disease that has not been introduced to the Middle West. And maybe in the future, you travel to the Northeast regions of the US, you may be our eyes to look for this disease, to report to local agency or USDA or local university extension to help people to track this disease. So let's start our talk. Beech tree in US, there are 3 types of beech tree: American beech tree, European beech tree, and Oriental beech tree. American beech is native to East US. They have been utilized for ecological use in nature, as well as in the urban area. They are used for on small ornamental trees for landscape. I would say it is not really hard to identify a beech tree because they have elephant leg shaped trunk, very straight, have very smooth surface, and very easy to carve, which I definitely not recommend you guys doing that while hiking. But as you can see, Mr. Tom really want to show his love to Diane, so that's his carve. But as a plant pathologist, I would say their love really depends on, the love displayed on the trunk really depending on the common diseases of beech tree. As you can see, there are several tree diseases here: anthracnose, botrytis canker, Nextria canker, Phytophthora rot, and the most notorious beech bark disease, BBD, which can cause a canker disease. Now let's look at the beech tree in Missouri. I quoted here from Missouri Department of Conservation, and the photo was cited here. And you can see that beech tree, they're not abundant in Missouri. They are normally live in the area, in the southeast area of Missouri. But they have a lot of use. They can be used for furniture, crates, flooring, tools, toils, and sometimes for barrels for brewing beer, because they are not easily to give off the flavor. So those are the basic information of beech tree. Like I mentioned, there's a list of the different diseases. Unfortunately, the list is getting longer because there's a new disease called a beech leaf disease, and the first detected in Ohio and has been spreading to the northeast area of US. And now it has spread to more than 13 states in the past decades. As you can see in this map, all the reddish color are the most recent finding or detection places. It has been considered one of the biggest threats to beech tree population due to the spreading and cause of tree mortality. For the symptoms, initially, this disease can cause those dark stripes on the leaf. Over time, the dark area will become thicker and leathery, kind of give you a leathery feeling, really thick. Over time, it will further develop into necrosis, twisting, distorted growth, and eventually the tree gonna cause defoliation. The tree gonna die in 3 to 5 years. This is actually not caused by a fungus or a bacteria. It is caused by a foliar nematode called the Litylenchus crenate microcani. So it is suspected to be native in Japan, but this nematode does not cause disease in Oriental beech tree in Japan, the native beech tree in that country. However, in contrast, all beech trees in US are susceptible to this disease, and the involvement of any other bacteria or fungi in this infection process is unknown. I summarized the disease cycle of this pathogen briefly. It starts with the female nematode laying eggs onto the bud, and the bud will be infected by the nematode in the spring when the bud break open and starting pushing out new leaves. The symptom gonna show up, like I mentioned to you, those stripes. And during the raining days in summer or fall, the nematode are gonna emerge, and they will be carried by birds, insects, or wind blowing or rain splash, and then will be transmitted by relatively a long distance, actually, not only just nearby trees, but also across states. You may be wondering, even though there's infection, there's still green, why it cause problems? because for normal tree, the normal leaves can do photosynthesis, produce growth and defense, while the BLD infected leaves will slow down the photosynthesis and will produce lower net carbon and gain, and gradually it will deplete the carbon energy stores and eventually will kill the tree. So for diagnosis, currently it's primarily by visual observation. There's some early detection method by molecular assay or spectroscopy method for in-field detection. For disease management, unfortunately, there are not many culture practices available. There's soil injection method, nematicide by spraying and injection to the roots are shown to be a certain level of effectiveness. I would recommend you to stop planting new beech trees before we have better idea about how to control this disease. Of course, always avoid any stresses and keep the tree healthy. You will be the one going out, go hiking and look for this disease, because I will be staying in the lab looking at the sample. And there's some disease that are resemble this beech tree leaf disease. For example, aphid infection, areneal patches, which is caused by aerial mites, and then beech and trichomes. So if you see any of this disease, that any of the symptoms of a beech tree that shown to be similar with the beech tree leaf disease, you may want to try this app, but don't do it before sending sample to me. We don't want after my talk in Missouri immediately becomes the states that have shown to be multiple places BLD positive. It has been detected in Ohio, but there's nowhere in Midwest to be shown to be positive. You may also want to check with the MDC for more information. So more take-home messages: it is severe plant disease for beech tree in US, and it is caused by foliar nematode, and all the species are currently susceptible. And there's a lot of research going on. Reported if you suspect the presence of this disease while you are traveling to northeast area, report to the local agency so that we can better track the spread of disease. That's all I have, Jennifer. Thank you so much for your time.
All right. Thank you, Peng. And with that, we will wrap up today's garden hour. You can join us each week from noon to 1. And if you'd like to ask questions for future garden hours, you can submit your question at the website listed here, or the site listed here. If you would like to save the chat, click on the 3 dots in the chat and click on Save Chat. And again, here's a map of Missouri with our regions and the horticulture specialist serving that region. And so with that, I want to thank you. I want to thank our presenters and the topics that they gave. And thank you to our participants. And we will see you next Wednesday. And I hope everyone has a good rest of the week, and happy Independence Day.